As the third-party cookie goes away, first-party data becomes more and more important.
You need to just start activating that data to understand that data.
It's how do I keep incrementally making these programs, better, more effective, reaching more of the right people with more of the right sort of information.
You don't want to feel like you're advertising and pushing yourself on someone. You want to be, ingrained into their life experience.
The goal here again is to be more targeted, to be more, to provide a better experience.
Let's talk media, people.
I'm David Fabbri, Chief Strategy Officer at LoSasso. I've been working with B2B clients for over 30 years here. I'm here today with Scott LoSasso, our Chief Executive Officer and namesake of the agency.
Another old man.
Another old performance media guy we've been at it a long time. And with Dimo Raychev, our Director of Digital Technology, who's really our expert in all things digital and technological. Welcome, guys. We are here to talk about first-party data use by B2B companies to supercharge their media.
Yeah.
We find we have a lot of B2B clients, and a lot of them are doing great work. And there are a lot of B2Bs who are very successfully using their data, but compared to consumer advertisers, direct-to-consumer, B2C advertisers, you see a lot less use or sophisticated use of data by B2Bs.
Yeah. I would say that generally that's very true. And, probably for, reasons that relate to, budgets. They're often not funded nearly at the same level for research and data work as consumer companies. Training the people that are in those organizations in marketing seats aren't always, coming from marketing MBA programs like they are in the consumer world. They're, people that have been in sales or engineering, have incredible knowledge of their industry and the things that they have learned work to sort of promote and sell their products, but not classically trained marketers always. Mm-hmm. And if they are, they're not necessarily in an organization that's marketing centric and rich with that type of thinking. So as this topic becomes more important for companies to really understand what first party data is and how to use it and why it's such a huge advantage today with media buying and segmenting and using your content to reach the right people over the right channels, it's a really important thing for B2B organizations to figure out, spend some focus on, and find the right partners to help them really kind of unleash all of the great sort of intelligence that is within their organization.
So first-party data, the simple way we can describe first-party data, it's the data you own. That's it. Now, most of the people think about, this is my CRM data, this is my customers' data, but that's not only first-party data. So we have data that we have from marketing platforms like Google Analytics. We have data from social media accounts. We have data from paid media marketing activities, whatever they do. We have data, outside data, let's say that an organization is running a trade show. All the people that visit the trade show is their data too. So all these are data sources that they technically can use.
It's sales data, of course.
Sales data.
Yeah.
If they have an online store or whatever, sales data. Or warranty database. That's also data that can be used.
So in terms of taking that data and doing something with it to make your media better, for instance, what are some of the things that people can be doing? How does that get applied?
There are many different ways. Let's get an example from, we mentioned trade show, right? There's that database of all the people that visited the trade show. So a marketer can look into that data to understand better who is the audience. What is the ideal customers that specific organization is looking for. So we take the data, we look into, the companies that they're visiting, then we're looking into job titles, who are the people that they're visiting. We look for a location, geolocation, where those people are coming from that specific location. Usually trade shows, when you register for a trade show, you collect different information. Are you planning to purchase something or not? So there is a lot of interesting data that you can build a kind of a profile on an audience, or even look into the industries from different companies that are visiting that trade show. Ultimately, the goal is to understand, what is the audience. Then when we have that information, we can use it to create better messaging, how we talk to those different segments, people, or we can use it for targeting, go to different media channels and start finding those people.
Yeah, and I think, the targeting aspect of it is really important because while you have a lot of targeting parameters that you can select when you're buying on any ad platform, whether it's, a Google Display Network or Facebook or Trade Desk or programmatic placements, they've got a lot of data that you can cross-reference with your own to sharpen and build better segmentation, right? So you use your own data uploading into those platforms to really build better, stronger targeting segments.
It's really aligning what you know about your customers with who you can reach because of what they have about their audiences.
And I think that you've often made the point that as the third-party cookie goes away, first-party data becomes more and more important, right? Because you are losing a data point that a lot of marketers and platforms have relied on. So the better you understand how to leverage your own data, the more effective you can be within those platforms. Today, when there is the third-party cookie available, and also, much more importantly, as that goes away.
How is that going to change the ability to target people? I mean, what do marketers lose when the third-party cookie goes away?
So third-party cookie is collecting a lot of data in terms of the activity, when you visit the site, who they are, collected through Chrome browser. It was collected from other companies before, like Apple. Apple kind of already cut the cord a little bit earlier. But we're going to lose to find specific audiences. The way Google built those target segments is based on that data. Here I wanted to mention that Google is actually working on something to replace that. It's based on a different technology. They do have a lot of data available. They call that privacy sandbox, Google Privacy Sandbox. So they go from that place of privacy, how important is that, consumer consent for giving their data, all these kind of things. So they talk a lot about that, and they talk about that new technology to use already available data from different sources, the way they collect it, and still to provide some kind of targeting segments to us. So what we're going to lose? We're going to lose some targeting, more specific way we find those audiences. But that's Google. Another thing I wanted to mention here is that we still have social media channels, for example. They're not going away. That's data that you give to them. So that's a good place to to target. And then first-party data, always important. Now, Scott mentioned how important is that. I personally feel that the data, first-party data, a data that the organization, a company owns, always been important. And it's so much different uses that we can do with that data.
Especially for B2Bs that are in more technical industries, being relevant and being in a place where you can actually showcase your subject matter expertise on a deep topic that is really relevant to the audience allows you to communicate much more effectively. So the other thing that sort of goes along with this use of first-party data to sort of supercharge your media is the ability to really showcase your expertise and bring your subject matter experts forward in a way that you're putting them in front of the right people in the right context. So I think there's nothing but great opportunity for B2B marketers that really kind of lean into this and take both the approach of how are we going to really use our data effectively, and then how are we going to use our expertise and showcase our expertise effectively.
So in the places where there's resistance or people don't know where to get started, what are the typical obstacles to B2B marketers doing more with their data?
Well, okay, so what I've heard many times over the last however many years is, our data's a mess. It's not really well organized. It's siloed. We've got sales data in some places. We've got prospect data. We've got trade show data. We've got distributors that keep their own data. So, it's just too much work to figure out how to use it. And we don't know if we have the rights in all these different places. So there's a lot of things that sort of keep you from taking what might be, a somewhat messy situation and getting started with it.
That's definitely being, in my experience working with clients, and when we start asking for data, it's always, the data, it's not clean, there is no consent or stuff like that. So my first thing is that that's always the case. but we should not be afraid to start looking into that data. Even if it's not ideal data, there's still value that we can get out from that data. But let's say it's a business-to-business company. Let's say that they have 200,000 records. It takes few hours for a data scientist just to look into that data to understand, what's going on there, what are the fields, and all these kind of things. They probably we need to validate if there is emails, right? We need to validate because people change jobs, whatever, and we need to do some email cleanup, which is not very expensive. Let's say it's like $200 for 200,000 emails, something like that. And then technically we can start using that data right away. We actually evaluated the structure of the data. We have some emails. Now we can start, activating those emails in media, for example.
Yeah. I was going to say, you mentioned consent before when you're talking about activating emails. I think it's important to point out, consent is important, and you're not going to take those emails, for instance, and start spamming them with an email program.
No.
But you can put some of that information to use right away in terms of targeting, other platforms with that email.
Building lookalikes.
Building lookalikes, but also digging in to understand what else there is to learn about these audiences.
I think one of the reasons I asked you that is that, whether it's not a massive investment to get started. And when you think about the advantage that it gives you, and if you look across the money that goes into, advertising year over year, it's a fraction of your ad spend. And if it's going to make the ad spend that much more effective, look at it through the lens of, modernization, improvement, creating more effectiveness with every other dollar you spend, instead of I don't know how I'm going to find $25,000 for a data project or whatever it ends up being.
And let's not forget the other source of first-party data, which is Google Analytics data or data from marketing tools. That data doesn't need to be cleaned up. You just need to reference that data. You need to just start activating that data to understand that data. So that's another set of data. People don't really think that, I own all these traffic insights in my Google Analytics account.
So talk to us about GA4 and Google Analytics data. What are things people, can be doing with what's already there, but also what are the things they should be thinking about in terms of setup there to get the most value out of that platform? Mm-hmm.
So simple example. So most of the websites, any websites actually, they have Google Analytics for now. So what you can do, you can create custom audiences there. There is a way to define, other than the audience that already exists, which is all traffic, mobile and desktop devices. You can go there and create audiences based on a lot of different options and activities. So you can define an audience that's been on the site for a certain amount of time, that visited certain amount of pages, or completed certain conversion point or purchase or whatever it. And then you can take that segment from Google Analytics 4 and you can push it to Google Analytics ads and target those people. Yeah,
so that's actually a good point, because a lot of B2Bs have very different audiences that they're addressing with different product lines, with different industries. The same product applied to one industry versus another has, a very different audience. So I think what you're saying is that looking at your analytics installation and having a strategy to understand, when people are in certain areas of your site, how that becomes a segment and how that relates to your ability to not just retarget them with very, effective ads and messaging, but to use other platforms, social platforms, media buying platforms, to reach them and others like them across the web, right? Across their digital
The goal here again is to be more targeted, to be more, to provide a better experience, targeted messaging, customized journey. And that's what that segmentation of data ultimately provides.
So, I know sometimes this stuff gets very technical, and we have these conversations and feel like people can kind of, fully understand because we live it.
Right.
What are how do we break some of these ideas down so that, you don't have to feel like it's so daunting? Because it's not that daunting once you sort of take the next steps. But a lot of people in B2B aren't doing a lot of the things that we see as best practice, right? There's still, if you think about the traditional B2B channels with, the trade shows and the legacy publications, and there's just not a lot of sophistication coming to those marketers from other places. What's a good place to start, or how do you get yourself ready to say, you know what, I need to look at this differently?
Yeah, I think, to your point about people not always knowing exactly what we're talking about, right? Having some tangible examples. Because I think sometimes when people look at the first-party data, they think, oh, they're going to build a lookalike audience, so that's it, right? That's all that it's
Or
about.
we already do retargeting.
Right. So there are a lot of different things that you can sort of look at when you get into a customer database, for instance, for one of these large trade shows that we have as a client. For all the large trade shows that we have as clients, we often look at the geographical distribution of registrants from prior shows. Because what that tells us is that even though these are national shows, we don't want to spread our budget over the entire country, because typically a show draws from a much more regional audience.
Right.
But also, there are going to be areas, different sort of industry hotspots or hubs or transportation hubs where people come from as well. So that gives us the ability to take a media spend and put it in a much more targeted way to make it more efficient.
Yeah, and I think the key there, right, because the geography and geo-targeting it's a very basic concept that people have been using with direct mail and all sorts of other legacy strategies. What you gain with using this data is that in each of those areas, you've got multiple segments that you can serve with relevant messaging, right? That's where it really begins to sort of
or you're
differentiate.
Cross-referencing, saying, okay, people in this part of the country are in these industries,
right?
And so we're serving content, ads, messaging, focused on that for them versus this other area of the country where they're heavy automotive or whatever it is.
Yeah, and even like this is the priority company list within these industries that we need to make sure that we're saturating across these titles, across these geographies. Right? There's just a lot more granularity to what you can plan and deliver when you're using data effectively.
Right.
There's an interesting use case from a couple years ago when we were working with a large RV manufacturer. And they were trying to understand what impact their marketing was having, how often people were purchasing RVs.
Yep.
So we did a data analysis. Basically, since the RVs are sold through distribution, the company didn't have direct information about the sales from the distributors, but they also have a warranty database. So when people would buy an RV, they would register. So then they did understand then who purchased and when. Maybe you can describe a little bit sort of, what we did there and what benefits of it.
That was actually a really interesting project. And it's like a prime example of how really valuable insights can come from data. So the warranty database, they are required to register the warranty on the time of the purchase into the dealership lot. So what was happening, we were having that data of who purchased and all their information. So the first thing we did, we started matching all the leads that were coming from the RVs to when exactly they were doing the purchase. So we kind of understood what is that journey of the first touch point to the actual purchase and how we can actually build that journey with some messaging and stuff and what we need to get people to the what. So that's the first insight we got. Then we look back into the data years back and we try to understand how people purchase RVs in general, because if you have an RV, most probably you're an RV person, you're going to keep purchasing those RVs. So what we discover is, when people purchase their first RV, how many years they have it, and when that same person will purchase their second RV, and not only that, but people usually upgrade with years. What kind of RV they're going to purchase? So with all this data, we start looking into our existing, customers in the funnel, and then we start targeting them. Hey, these people are most probably going to purchase another RV in the next year. Let's just start showing them the right message or the right type of RV. So it was like really interesting, a lot of good data for our audience and how we can target them.
You know what that reminds me too? We did another project with that company that helped in collecting first-party data. So we had what type of camper RV quiz that we got people to fill out. So then we captured lead information, but then we also learned about kind of where they were, what types of activities they like to do, all these things that we could then use to provide more targeted information in
Yeah.
emails and other programs.
Yeah, that's actually a nice overlay with how you can really effectively use social, right? Because that was largely distributed over social. It was a very, it was engaging, it was fun, but it was data capture, right? So you were able to sort of put something into market that had multiple value points, right? You were collecting data, you were building strong brand presence, you were helping someone understand like how they fit. You sort of that ego satisfaction of who am I. So yeah, that was good. When you lose visibility to your product as it goes into market because it goes through a distribution channel, a lot of people use that as a key barrier not to be able to sort of use their own first-party data because they don't have the ultimate customer data.
Right.
So there are ways to look at every scenario and say, okay, it's never perfect. The data is never perfect. What are the workarounds? What are the things that we can do with the data we have access to apply some of these same strategies? Because it's very, very few organizations are working with ideal data sets. And
I think that's a great insight. I think it's not what's the perfect answer that gives me the perfect one-to-one connection with the perfect audience. It's how do I keep incrementally making these programs better, more effective, reaching more of the right people with more of the right sort of information.
Yeah, and how do I design programs that improve my ability to use data?
So what should people be doing if they want to get the ball moving or if they want to move forward in their sophistication?
Well, I mean, first of all, prioritizing, I don't know, I guess it's the first commitment to, okay, we've got to do something different. I think that, very often companies from a budgeting standpoint are always feeling like, well, we didn't have enough last year for all the things we wanted to do. We just have to do a little more of all those things. Going to a zero-based budgeting to say, okay, what are the things that we should be doing without necessarily assuming that all of our money is going to be spent the same way it was last year.
I think the other thing that probably slows people down is not knowing exactly who's going to be doing what, right? So if I'm a marketer, does that mean I need a data guy on my team internally? Does that mean I'm partnering with an agency? Do I need to find a different kind of a data partner?
To my experience, and that's why I mentioned it earlier, it's the understanding that the data could be a lot of things and not to be afraid to start. Again, a lot of companies think, oh, that's a big project. We need to, clean the data and do the data. But there's so many ways that we can start activating data, and we do it. And I think it's up for marketing leaders and agencies, specialists to approach their clients with the right mindset and say, we need to use data. And that's part of our planning, and that's part of our strategy and our media. That's how it starts.
Yeah, I guess the simple way to look at that is, what you've decided is important is what's budgeted, right? Mm-hmm. So if you look at your budget and say, okay, as we divide our budget up into these different areas, how much of it, what percentage of it is in things like data, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a budget for use of data or data strategy? If there's, nothing set aside there, you're not going to make any progress on it, right? If it's not budgeted, it's not important. So that's probably a good starting point, is to say, how do we look at our budget differently and make sure that we have, strategy, data, and modernization sort of funded at some level.
I think the other thing is, if you went to a marketer and said, hey, I got a program I'm going to give you that's going to give you a lot more information about who your customers are and what they think and care about, and that's going to help you reach them more effectively and make you better against your competition, do you want to do it? You'd be like, yeah, of course, right? But when it's like, do you want this data project for us to sort of make these incremental changes, coming at it that way, they go, oh, it sounds like a big project and I don't know if I have the budget for it. But if you go beyond sort of what it is to what you're getting from it, it seems like a much, much more important investment in terms of why wouldn't you be doing that?
Well, and to bring that full circle to where we started, right? We started by talking about how do you use your data to sort of supercharge your media. So, maybe a logical starting point is looking at it through the lens of, how are we going to deploy media differently, right? How do you get started in a way that, takes a portion of your media budget to make the rest of it work harder? I mean, I think that's actually a good place for companies to start, because there is an audit, there is an evaluation, there is sort of some digging and research that you have to do to understand, okay, how are we going to use this? But if you look at it through the lens of, we know we're making an investment in driving leads and building presence with our marketing, you can start with using your data to amplify the performance of your media.
And how much urgency do you think this deserves?
Well, I mean, the longer you wait, the further behind you fall. So if you're eventually going to modernize the way you look at how you use your data, the longer you wait, the more it costs you on both ends.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. I mean, it's happening right now. Originally, Google said that it's going to depreciate third-party cookies in 2022. Now it's 2024, and I think they're going to pull the trigger. It's happening now. So, if anything, first-party data is going to be more and more important.
I honestly think that that's part of what makes B2B a lot of fun, right? Because you're going for, niche audiences with technical products that need a lot of understanding. Mm-hmm. So the advantage you get when you use your data and can kind of tell a story with, more granularity and more, definitive relevance. You're being relevant because your audience is tight, and you've got the, engineers and subject matter experts that really have, a lot to offer to the people that are struggling with, whatever it is that your product solves for. Mm-hmm. So that, I think, is really part of what keeps the business we're in super engaging and interesting and fun. And I would also say that, like, across so many of the B2B verticals that we work in, the whole industry is lagging in terms of they're just a little behind. And I'm not just saying that they don't know how to, I'm not suggesting they don't know how to do marketing, but I'm suggesting that, a lot of, the people making the decisions on the client side that we work with recognize that their audience needs a lot of hand-holding to mm-hmm. modernize mm-hmm. and use, technology differently in all aspects of their business, right? So, I mean, data is such a wide topic because you think of, every industry we work in is trying to figure out how to use data and AI and, automation and, modernization in every aspect of their mm-hmm. business, right?
The big opportunity there is if you get ahead and you're doing it well, it's a real strategic advantage.
Yeah, and the things that a lot of times our clients are trying to teach so that their customers can evolve, they're complicated, they're technical, but now we have better ways to make sure that those stories land in the right places with the right people.
Anyway, thank you very much, guys, for taking the time today. I think there's been some good discussion here. It's always interesting to put a finer point on some of this stuff, and even though we're in it every day, even just talking, amongst ourselves and getting ready to have this conversation, refocuses it in a way that's great.
Yeah, I mean, we covered a lot. I hope there's, some things in there that people can think differently about. And, the important part is getting started and recognizing that if you aren't really using a lot of these strategies now, there's great opportunity for you to do things and find some new excitement and improve your work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, David. I think that it was a great conversation, and it's important for people to understand how important is that and how they can use whatever they already have.
Yeah.